Brett Battles is the USA Today best-selling author of over 30 novels. His debut novel, The Cleaner, was nominated for the 2008 Barry Award for Best Thriller and the 2008 Shamus Award for Best First Novel. His second novel, The Deceived, won the 2009 Barry Award for Best Thriller. He received an additional Barry Award nomination for the fourth in his Quinn series, The Silenced. Battles was born and raised in Southern California. His parents instilled a love of books in him early on, and there were many days his mom would kick him out of the house in the afternoon just so he would get a little sunshine. Though he still makes California his home, he has traveled extensively to such destinations as London, Paris, Rome, Singapore, and others, all of which play parts in his current and upcoming novels. Brett, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. I was pleasantly surprised, by the way, to see that Alistair MacLean was listed as one of your influences, because he's one of mine as well. And it just doesn't seem like he gets the love these days that I feel like he deserves.
He doesn't. And I have to say, it's been years since I read one of his books. But when I was a teenager, I think I read, and I'm talking like 13, 14.
Right. Yep. Me too.
Yeah. I think I picked everything of his that I could from the store, because he was, I was just so intrigued by the adventures that he was having and the different exciting, thrilling things that were happening in all of his books, the World War II stuff, the spy stuff, Ice Station Zebra, Bear Island, what was some of the other, Guns of Navarone was Mr. MacLean, for God's sake, which is also a great movie.
Yeah.
I loved Alistair.
I think my all-time favorite is probably Where Eagles Dare.
That's a great one.
That was a good one. But there was something I recently I purchased all of his books again recently because they've republished them, like with new covers and all that stuff. And so every now and then I just go back and dip into it just to read some of it. And he has such a distinct style. Especially when you compare it with what you're reading today. I mean, not like one is better than the other, but it's just such a distinct. It's so MacLean.
You know you're reading one of his books.
Yep.
And actually, if you look at them, looking back at them, they're probably 60,000 words or 70. They're not long. No. A couple of them are long, but they're short books too, which is fine. No knock on that. In fact, it was great. But I just ripped through everything of his I could get.
It's fantastic stuff. Like
books are. They must be under my parents' garage or something.
Oh man, yeah. Well, anyway, we could probably stay here all day, have a love fest by Alistair MacLean, like the understated humor and all that was in it. But anyway, I did want to move on and talk about some of your stuff. In February of this year, you released Nightman. Could you tell us a little bit about that book? For example, is it a spin-off of another series?
It is a spin-off of my Jonathan Quinn series, which is The Cleaner, and the my award-winning Quinn series, which is my most popular series. Mm-hmm. Nate, who is the protagonist of Nightman, which is actually going to be a series too. It's just at the moment there's only the one book. He is in all of the Quinn books from the very beginning, with the exception of the Quinn prequel because he wasn't around at that point. But starting in The Cleaner, he is Quinn's apprentice, and throughout the series he has been moving on and becoming Quinn's partner eventually, that's where he is at this point in the series. And in fact, he's going to continue being in that series. The Nightman adventures are things that are happening that he does between jobs with Quinn. The Quinn series is a spy series. Nightman is more of a crime PI thriller series in a vigilante kind of situation. And it's Nate has a much more developed sense of humor. I mean, Quinn is funny, but he's not always funny. He's a little more serious. Nate is a little more self-deprecating. He can see the humor in all sorts of situations, and I chose to do Nightman, and which I probably will continue in the series, it's first person. It's actually first person present tense, which works really well for the story that it's told.
Mm.
And that was a very conscious decision on my part to set it apart from the Quinn books, which are all third person. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed writing it.
Sounds like it. Now, do you find it difficult to switch between the two styles, or is this something that's kind of giving you a welcome break?
Well, I'm always looking for some. You always need something like almost like a palate cleanser in a way to kind of switch between things, because I think I have 6 different series or something at this point, and all of them are a little bit, I mean, some of them are very different. I have some sci-fi series, and then I have the spy series, and I have another spin-off from the Quinn series that features this other group of people. And then I have some other just standalone thrillers and everything. And Quinn is, I always come back to Quinn. I'm always doing a Quinn every year.
Mm.
The other ones I'm kind of mixing up when I'm throwing them into the mix. That's using mix twice in a sentence. My editor would kill me. When I'm throwing it back in, into the blender, if you will, it's always nice to have something to just kind of break things up.
Right.
It just keeps things fresh. But
Yeah.
the Quinn series, since I have been writing it for so long, is very in general sense is much easier to write now because I know the characters so well. I say general sense only because I am working on Quinn right now and I'm having a lot of stops and starts that I don't usually have.
Right.
But it'll work itself out. I mean, I know it will, so it always does.
So you mentioned you have like 6 different series. Did I hear you right?
Yeah, something like
that.
I don't remember, like 6, 7, 5. I don't know, something like that.
Well, see, a lot of people can't remember how many books they've written. You can't even remember how many series you've written. So there's some prolific work for you.
I can tell you how many books, but I can't tell you how many series.
So why do you think it is that you prefer to work in series rather than standalone books?
I have written a few standalones, which I really enjoy, but I think what happens is I fall in love with the characters and I want to know what happens next. In a strange way, my Quinn series is a spy series, but he is an operative, but his talent is he's not the assassin or anything. He's the one who goes in and gets rid of the body after somebody else has done it in, and makes everything nice and clean, and then just disposes of the body so that it'll never be found. He's an after character, so he's kind of what I call a what happens next character.
Okay.
And not that he doesn't have to do a little bit of killing on his own just to to keep things right, because otherwise the books would be boring. But that plays to my sense of I've always wanted to know what happens next. Like you see the car crash and everything happens, but what happens after the car crash? What happens to all these people after that? And I kind of feel like that. We'll see the adventure happen in this book, and you see the relationships develop between the characters and everything, but what happens next?
Right.
What happens next? I'm invested. I've invested a lot of time in these people, and I don't want to just stop. Usually,
right.
So that's what happens. It's not always consciously thinking that I'm going to write a series. In fact, when I wrote the first Quinn book, I didn't think I was going to write a series. I have a couple of others where I didn't think it was going to be a series when I first wrote the first book, but it turned out that way. Now, there have been a couple that I wrote purposely knowing it was going to be a series too. Mm-hmm. So, but I guess it just comes easier to me. I like television shows that are serial, where it's the next episode is connected to the last episode is connected to the last episode. And that's what I like to do with my series, where usually each book is a contained adventure, but there's still the overarching arc of our main characters and what's happening to them, and they're developing over time and time. I love that kind of stuff. And you can really do that in a series.
Well, that's the problem I occasionally have with movies that I really get into, because it's an hour and a half and like, oh, okay, I've invested all this emotional energy into this guy or girl getting out of whatever it is, and now I'll never hear from them again.
I love this like golden age of television right now, because I mean, we have so much great TV out there, and it's a lot of these more these stories that continue on from episode to episode to episode. And it's not back in the 70s. It's not Happy Days where every episode's a reset, and which all the shows back then were, even the cop shows. It was like, what happened last week plays no bearing on what happens this week. I remember seeing these great guest characters come in and have this amazing effect on what happened in a series or in a show, particular episode. And no one would mention them again in the future, because I'm saying, God, that was such a, I mean, they were so profound, and it's like, drives me crazy. But now we don't have that. I mean, we got, Game of Thrones and the Walking Dead and The Wire and all these great things that you could go on and we could talk about this for hours too. That have these great story vehicles where each episode is an amazing, interesting event, but you're also invested in the characters, and you get to see their development. You get to see where they're going until they get canceled.
Right. Well, it's always, it adds an element, or at least a sense of reality to it, because Absolutely. Back in the day, it was always funny to me. It didn't matter how serious the problem was, how serious the issue, it was solved in 30 minutes.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and I was just thinking about this, like with comedies, and I mentioned Happy Days, but now even comedies do it, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. If you ever watch that, it's it's a comedy about a cop comedy, but they don't forget what happened last week, or they don't forget what's happened, and they're continuing to develop. Things are happening to the characters that affect future episodes, and I love that. I mean, that's more real, know. Yeah.
Definitely. So it does make sense, though, if you were to approach a series in that way, because we as writers, we are trained, or at least train ourselves to think, what if, what next, what happens next, and that's our bread and butter. So how do you, for example, keep things fresh when writing a series? Because I can imagine, and I know in my own experience, occasionally I'll find myself reinventing a situation over again. So how do you avoid that?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, because that is something that really bugs me. I remember reading authors that I loved at first, but after a while, I felt like I was reading the same book over and over and over again.
Right.
And I'll name a couple of specifics who are biggies who I really loved and were influential on me. But after a while, it was like, what the heck, guys? It was like Robert Ludlum eventually started writing the same book over and over again, in essence. I mean, it was different setup, but you could see it's the guy, and the innocent guy in peril, and whatever. And then Michael Crichton started doing that too, where he had his techno setups and everything, but it was always this person who got caught in the middle of something, and he's trying to get out. And it was like, I think I was reading Airframe and at one point, and I go, I've read this book. It's and then I put it aside. And then who was he? There was one other. It slipped my mind right now. But anyway, yeah, that's something that's bugged me. Now, I won't say that there aren't things that happen similarly in a lot of my books. I mean, in the Quinn series, his job is to get rid of bodies. So he's often doing that kind of work. So he uses a lot of the same techniques over and over. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I always try to be cognizant of not writing the same story I wrote before, and making the situation different and believable within the world that I'm writing. I don't know if I've always achieved it. But I'm hoping. I'm basically writing two Quinn stories right now, and one of them is something I've never done before, and that's where it's basically the whole book will be set within a 24-hour period.
Oh, interesting.
Because I wanted to try something different. I wanted to see how that would play out, and it's a perfectly logical story to fit within the grand scheme of the series. Mm-hmm. And the other one is the other book is the whole book is a flashback to 16 years before. So it's like it's not the full prequel, but it's after the prequel, but before the cleaner started. So, filling in a gap in the history of Quinn, which is kind of fun for me too. So yeah, I know there will be similar things because that will happen, but it's so important to me that a reader doesn't read it and think, I've read this book before. Right. They do. I mean, I'm sure that's going to happen for some people, but I'm hoping that I don't do that.
Well, I think you are achieving your goal to a certain extent anyway, because the reviews on your books have been amazing, and you get well-deserved praise from your writing. And the stuff, I haven't read all of your stuff, but what I have read has been very good. But, of course, you all get the occasional bad review. How do you handle reviews that may not be as flattering as you would like?
Well, there are a couple things I do is, first, as a writer, you know this, you can get 50 great 4- and 5-star reviews, glowing reviews. And you get one star review, and that's what you remember.
Right.
And that's what you think about it, and that's what makes it hard to go to sleep the night after you've read that.
Yeah.
Or even looked at it. Any like 3, 2, or 1, any of those just kind of bug me. What I do, a couple things I do when I put out a book, I usually spend for the first month, I'll check the reviews. And after that, I won't look at reviews after that. I'll just check my star rating just to make sure it's not going wonky. And if it's going wonky, then obviously there's something wrong and I need to know about that. But luckily I haven't really had that yet. But, I got the Nightman book has, I think it's like 113 reviews right now. And, out of that, it's like 4.7 stars or something. So, really nice and solid. Yeah. So it's like probably 105 of the reviews are 5-star, or 100 of the reviews are 5-star, and 15 of them are well, no, that doesn't even make sense math wise, but somewhere right. 7 4-star, and then there's like 2 3-star, 1 2-star, and 1 1-star. And those things bug the shit out of me. Can I curse? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
Oh, you're fine. It's online. We're not beholden to anyone.
But it's like, and when I got that 1 1-star, I just read just the first line of it, and then I stopped. Because I knew it was going to bug me anyway, just reading that first line. And yes, it bugged me for days. In fact, it's still a little bit under my craw.
Sorry to bring it up.
No, it's right. It's
you've just now conquered it, and here I brought it up again.
It's a legitimate question, but I think the key is not to read them.
Yeah.
And just move on, because I'm working on the next book. I can't be worrying about the last book unless. From that standpoint, unless there's a ton of bad reviews, and then obviously there's something wrong, and you need to do something about that. So,
yeah, this is something I tell myself and occasionally others when they ask like a similar question. Is it helps the legitimacy, in my view, of a book to have a couple of iffy reviews on there, because there are books I go to and they're nothing but glowing reviews, and you kind of tell, wait a minute, this guy has a lot of aunts and uncles or something. Yeah,
it definitely helps with the legitimacy of the book. Does not help with your ego.
No.
Let's get that straight, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that helps at all, but that's what I tell myself.
And I'm not saying that the good reviews help with my ego too, because I sit there and go, oh, it's probably just someone I know, so right. It doesn't count.
Just sounds so familiar.
I don't know if that's true, but
So speaking of writing, just maybe more philosophically, do you think people choose writing, or do you think writing chooses people?
Well, I think that I don't think you can black and white it. I don't think you can. I'm sure there is a spectrum on it, like with pretty much anything in life. It falls somewhere on it. I know that I wanted to be a novelist since I was in 5th grade. So it was something that has been in my head of what I was going to do since I was 10 years old. And so for it's just been part of me. I don't know if that means it chose me, maybe. I certainly didn't have other things and then say, you know what, maybe I'm going to give this writing thing a try. I mean, for me, it was always like, you got to make time to do this. And there were many years that I didn't. First book didn't come out until I was 45. So, it took a long time from 10 to 45 to finally get a published book. But, but it was always there in me. It wasn't me thinking, oh, let me give this a try. But I know there are people who do that too, and successfully. Good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you take us maybe through the process for planning a novel? Do you have it all set out beforehand, or just you find out what happens along the way?
I am more of a pantser than an outliner, for sure. Writing from the seat of my pants. I'll have an idea of where I want to end up, sort of vague, like a goalpost way out here. And I might have an idea for the beginning, or I might not. And if it's a series, it's okay because I know the characters. I'll figure it out. And then I just kind of go. And I might have little beats that are starting to come into my head, but sometimes they don't come until like a day or two before I need them. But I usually consider my first draft to be like this giant outline. And then it's all in the rewrite to get it to work correctly. There is junk in there, and sometimes I will be halfway through a book and I decide, no, this character needs to be more like this, so I change the way he acts for the second half of the book, which means I got to go back to the first half and change that. Sometimes I'll stop and I'll go back and do it, but most of the time I try to get as close to the end as I possibly can without having to go back. I almost always, before I write the last few chapters of a book, I'll have to go back to the beginning of the book and rewrite it to get it all nice and clean so that I can coherently write the end of the book. It's not always the case, but but there are times when I find myself wishing I outlined more, like right now, but but I'm getting through it. I've been spending a few days. I've actually been spending a lot more time. Taking time off to actually think about where these ones are going to keep things straight, but it happens.
Yeah, I've long wished that I could be more of an outliner because I just feel like that would make the writing process so much easier. And maybe it doesn't, but I've tried. I've really tried to outline, and I don't know if my mind just doesn't work that way or what it is.
I think for me, I don't know if it's for you, but for me, I get bored sometimes if I have it, because I already know what the story is, and writing a lot of times is the process of discovery, and I enjoy that. And maybe I'm just not doing the outlining right, but I wish I could do more of it. And there are times I tell myself I'm going to try to do more of it, and maybe I will in the future. It would definitely, even if I had a little bit more, a couple of pages written out ahead of time, just some bullet points, probably wouldn't hurt. It's taking a lot of stuff, go back and redos, but I always get there in the end. The book in the end always turns out exactly how I want it, but it's just figuring it out along the way.
Yeah, whatever works. That's kind of what I've had to come down to, because I struggled for a long time because, when you're trying to learn how to write, like I was reading all these how-to books and writing manuals, and like they're all saying, like 95% of them were saying to outline. So I always felt like I was doing it wrong, and I finally had to come to grips with the fact that if what I'm doing is working, then maybe that's it's just the way it is.
I don't think there is any one way to write. I think we all have our way to write. A lot of us are very similar. You can break them up into it's like a Venn diagram, where there's this group and there's an area where they kind of cross over, but we're all dots within those circles, and we're not right on top of each other. So we're all doing something a little bit differently all the time. But you just got to find what works for you. And often, I know I found for me, process and everything, it changes over time. It can change over a year. It can change over months, or it can change over a decade. Different things. So it's it's ever evolving, I think.
Yeah. I think the important thing is just to keep your eye on the ball, which is get the words on the page. that's the thing.
Button, chair, and fingers on keyboard.
Yeah. So speaking of that, what's your day? I don't know, daily, what writing schedule like? Do you have a daily word count you try to keep to, or no?
I do. I try to do. My goal has come down over the past several years, so I'm slowing a little bit. But I try to get somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 words a day.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be able to get like 4,500 to 5,000 words a day, which was awesome, but I haven't been able to do that for a while. And I don't always hit the 2,500 either. And that frustrates me when I do that, which is the backside of having a goal is when you don't hit it, there's a minor frustration in there. Yeah. But, if you do that, and I want to write 5 days a week, I'm a full-time writer, so that's my job. So, if I'm getting $2,500 words a week, that's 12,000 words, 13,000, whatever it is, 12,000, I don't know. Yeah, 12,500 words. If I get 3,000 every day, which I haven't in a while, that would be 15,000 words a week. And, you're going to write a draft in 4 or 5 weeks, or I'm sorry, in 6, 7, 8 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
You'll have a draft depending on how long the book is, which is great. So,
yeah.
I try to get a book done from start to finish editing. Like I try to do it within 3 months. It's whether I hit that or not, it's different. But we all have our own speeds. Everybody writes at a different speed. Everybody also has different things, day jobs, life commitments, everything. You just got to write around it. My first few books, I was writing before work and after work. And, I was probably lucky to get 500 to 1,000 words done on any one day back then. Yeah, but you make do with what works for you,
Right.
And don't compare yourself to other people.
That's huge. I mean, I think it's one thing as writers, we just maybe be a little more gentle with ourselves at times. We can be very difficult, very hard on ourselves if we don't meet these somewhat arbitrary goals we set.
Absolutely. I'm still very hard on myself, and I shouldn't be as hard on myself, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah. So if we have somebody watching this, and they're a writer, trying to be a writer, and they do have kids, day jobs, and all this stuff, life commitments, as you said, and they have a very limited time in which to write. Do you have any tips for them about how they can get that inspiration flowing?
Well, I think the important thing is you don't wait for inspiration,
right?
Mm-hmm. And you don't write when the feeling comes to you. Mm-hmm. You write because it's time to write, and what you write, maybe you have a half hour a day or 15 minutes a day, and you might get 100 words or 150 words done in that time every day. That's fine. That's what you should do, even if those words are crap and you end up throwing those away, because the practice of writing, it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the easier it is to do to a certain extent. I mean, you still got to do the plotting and everything like that, but the mechanics of it become easier and easier and easier the more you do it. It's the 10,000 hour rule. If you can master something after 10,000 hours of doing something.
Right.
So it's important that you just, if you have all these things happening in your life, you say, okay, I can only write 2 days a week for a half hour each day. Like I have to get up early before everybody wakes up and do it. Or I can write for 20 minutes at lunch at work or something like that. Then you do it. And even if the inspiration isn't there, you write, and you can always go back and rewrite it. That's what rewriting. The thing is, the first thing you write isn't going to be perfect. In fact, it's going to be crap. My first drafts, even now, are crap. They're terrible. Nobody would understand them if they read them. And but I understand them, and so I go back and I clean them up, and everything's fine. It's that's the way that, I mean, Stephen King doesn't write the perfect draft the first time he writes something. I mean, the first thing he puts on a page, I mean, he may go back the next day and rewrite what he wrote the day before, but when that first stuff gets on the page, he's just getting it out. It's the process. Just get it out. The book isn't going to write itself.
Yeah.
Or the short story or whatever you're working on.
Right. Yeah, I was talking with Kevin Tumlinson, and he was saying one of the things that he learned to do is just embrace the suck.
Yes,
it's not always going to be fun, but
Excellent.
You embrace the process.
That's perfect. Absolutely. Because it is. And you just got to know that, I mean, 90% of writing is rewriting, really.
Yeah.
I mean, 90% of your time is going to be spent writing. Well, not 90, maybe 75% will be writing your first draft. But the rewriting is the most important part of it, really, because that's when you're, and it's not just one pass. You're going to do multiple passes. You're going to clean it up. And then finally you're going to polish it off and just really fix all the problems. And then you're going to give it to somebody to read, and they're going to say, I don't understand why this happened. Where did this guy go? And then you go, oh, right. Then you're going to go back and you're going to fix it a little bit more, but that's fine. That's the process.
Right.
That's the process.
How do you go about creating your characters?
They just kind of come, I don't necessarily consciously create them. It's as I'm, I might have a, for lack of a better word, an archetype in my head about somebody who I'm just starting to create, but then I start molding it out with all these just little idiosyncrasies or things that they say or the way that they think, and start building a back history. And a lot of that comes through the writing. In fact, I would say most of it comes through the writing. I don't necessarily go in knowing everything about a character. In fact, often when I'm writing, since I don't write from an outline, and you probably have the same experience, I'll start writing on a day, and I'll have 2 or 3 characters show up that day that I had no idea at the beginning even existed, and maybe one of them becomes like a fairly major player for the rest of the story,
right.
and that's fine, and that's fun, that's discovery, and then you start molding them out, and you might not get them completely right in your draft, but that's, again, now you go back to the rewrite, and you just like mold them into this 3-dimensional, interesting character that fits in with everything else.
That's so true. I had one character, not to make this about myself, but I had one character I just needed a stand-in, because the scene was kind of flat, and he ended up being a pretty major player for like 3 books. So it was just... I know
well, I would here this is interesting. Nightman, which features Nate, who's Quinn's assistant. In the original draft of The Cleaner, the very first Quinn book, my very first published book, in fact, the version that Random House bought, but before I did another edit, and thankfully my editor made me do this. In that version, Nate dies in the first 50 pages of the book. Because it was supposed to give motivation to Quinn to do some other stuff.
Right.
And she's going, I kind of think maybe it would be better if he stayed alive, because he's kind of like a everybody kind of person. He's a good vehicle for the reader into the story, to give them someone to identify with, because, he's just new to the business and everything like that. And she was so right. And so I went back, and luckily there was another character that I had brought in that he could just kind of slip into that role throughout, and now he's been in all the books. Now he's got his own series,
Scene stealer.
Yeah, he wasn't even supposed to live, he was supposed to die in the first book, and he's still around.
Please learn your place, Nate. Come on.
He's also my mom's favorite character. So
awesome. Well, this time has flown by, but we don't want to leave without I guess touching on something what we mentioned earlier, and that's what you're working on right now. What can we look forward to from you in the near future?
I'm working on a new Quinn, actually two. I think it's two. Um, I'm debating. It was it's definitely a Quinn, but it was one where I was telling two different stories in it,
Hmm.
and now I've decided to pull them apart and do them separately. They're going to be each of them is going to be a little bit shorter than a traditional. A traditional Quinn is somewhere between 80 and 100K for
Hmm.
me, word wise. These will probably be closer to 50 to 60K each, but I think they're interesting, integral stories that will just add to the whole series, and they are related, but I think it's better if they play out by themselves. At least that's what my thinking is as of this morning.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm going right now. So one of them will be out in probably the one that's the flashback one that I talked about will be out in hopefully in early July,
Hmm.
and then the other one I'm just guessing now because I haven't completely worked out the schedule on it, but I would think August, September, possibly. Um, and then hopefully I'll have the second Nightman book out before the end of the year. So
Awesome.
that's the plan at this point.
Fantastic. We'll look forward to it. And the first Nightman is available now. People, go and get
No,
it,
it is.
please.
No, it
I
is.
picked up my copy, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. So, Brett Battles, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me. This has been great. I really enjoyed it.